Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Bryson Rose. The pronouns that I use are he, him, and his. I'm the Senior Director of Advocacy and Capacity Building at the Hetrick-Martin Institute, and welcome to part 3 of our Inclusive Workplace series called Moving Toward Belonging. Today's conversation will focus on the power and the transformative possibilities of intentional mentoring. Before we begin, please join me in thanking our sponsors for their plentiful support throughout the series. So let's welcome Facebook, Coca-Cola, Bloomberg, Con Edison, Davidson, Macy's, Nordstrom, Warner Media, Wells Fargo, and Yahoo. So thank you again. I'd also like to thank our former panelists and keynote speakers for their earlier participation. Without such overwhelmingly positive feedback from our viewers, we wouldn't have continued with this effort. So thank you again for sharing your insight and your brilliance with us all. With our third and final installment of the series, we intend to focus our conversation on what experts say is the potential proverbial factor in creating truly diverse, equitable, and inclusive workplace environments: mentorship. According to a 2016 American Sociological Review, mentoring was correlated to between a 9% and 24% increase of minority representation at the corporate managerial level. For some corporations, mentorship begins from forming partnerships with historically Black colleges and universities, ensuring a more diverse pipeline for internships and job placement. For others, it includes creating networks and communities, typically known as ERGs or employment resource groups, that allow for historically excluded groups such as women, people of color, and or LGBTQIA plus people to commune, build connection, and gain support, and decrease a sense of isolation. More and more, though, DE&I initiatives are focusing on individual mentorship and its potentially meaningful shift in representation at top corporations and organizations. So we'll hear from a few organizational leaders about how mentorship has played a role in their professional lives. So first, joining me will be Joe Presley, the CEO of Hetrick-Martin Institute. Next will be Elisa Crespo, the Executive Director of New Pride Agenda. And last but certainly not least, Ashley McGowan, Global Lead for Facebook Equality, for Business Equality at Facebook.
Hi.
Hello. So let's kick it off. Let's be a little, shake our shoulders out. Tell us about your professional journeys. So how is it that each of you are sitting here with me discussing mentorship? And I'll kick it to whoever wants to start.
I can kick it off. So hi again, my name is Ashley McGowan. The pronouns that I choose are she, her, and hers. And I'm very excited to be here with all of you today to talk about something that has been really transformative in the way that I think about my strengths, as well as I think about my growth within my career path. So I currently work at Facebook as our global business equality lead. And what's most exciting about the role that I'm in today is that it is a true intersection of the passions that I have, as well as the strengths that I've been able to develop over my career. And the way that I was able to get through that process to get to this place was really rooted in a lot of very intentional mentorship. I had one very strong mentor outside of the Facebook community that was able to help me grow and expand my horizon on what I even thought was possible in the advertising and tech space. When I first met her, I only worked within the creative advertising agency space, but she showed me a whole different world about career opportunities inside of different sectors of advertising and marketing, which is how I got to the tech side, which eventually landed me at Facebook. There is another mentor that I utilize within Facebook that really has helped me with a lot of career coaching and programming and really some difficult conversations that have gotten me to a place to really identify what my strengths are. And what I know about myself from that practice is that I do need to be operating in a place that is a intersection of my strengths as well as the passions that I have to really make sure that I'm enjoying my job and I'm also doing the best that I can do at my job to make sure that the acceleration and the growth in my career path continues to be there.
Beautiful. we're going to come back to something you said, but I'm going to let Joe and Elisa talk.
So go ahead, Elisa.
The question is, how did we get here, right? What was it, Bryson?
How did you find yourself in this moment having this conversation with me?
Oh God, I feel like it was such a long journey. I have to start out by saying that I think the only reason I was ever able to get to the place where I am in life today is because of generations of trans people who came before me. I should repeat that my name's Elisa Crespo. I'm the executive director of the New Pride Agenda, and I'm a trans Latina. And I'm here because of the generations of trans people, mainly Black and brown trans women, who fought for me to be here, who created this space for people like me to be taken seriously, to be looked upon as people who could contribute to advocacy and to many other things. My journey was one that was, I would never have thought I'd be sitting here talking to you. I grew up as a working class young girl with a working class mother in public housing. I went to public schools. I became a sex worker because I only saw trans women around me sex working, and I thought that was what we were supposed to do. Then I decided that my passion, or discovered rather that my passion, was public service and politics. So I went back to school, I studied political science, and doors opened for me, as they do with people who are privileged enough to have higher education. And from there, I just learned how to hustle. I learned that a closed mouth doesn't get fed, and that if I don't, bust into a room, even if I'm anxious or I don't feel like I belong there, that I was never going to be able to succeed or excel, rather. And so I started working for elected officials. I ran for public office, and I think that was the next sort of level that really thrusted me into the public sphere. Was becoming the first trans woman of color to run for public office in the Bronx, and from there more doors opened for me. And here I am as a thought leader and as a leading transgender advocate in New York. But I acknowledge the many people who came before me, whose shoulders that I stand on, the safe spaces that were created for young queer people like me, like the Hetrick-Martin Institute, that allowed us to thrive and to exchange ideas and to be ourselves. And so there's so many elements and factors, and the journey is one that is partially generations before me and partially me just stepping into my power, and that's a continuous journey that I'm still going through.
Beautiful.
So I guess that leaves me. So I'm Joe Presley. I'm the CEO of the Hetrick-Martin Institute. And Bryson, how would I answer that question? I think that for me, there's actually a moment in time that I can sort of say that transformed my life. And that goes back to 1990, when someone who was probably one of my first professional mentors saw something in me that I was surprised about. So, and that was, her name was Amy Herman. She's no longer, unfortunately, with us, but her name was Amy Herman, and she was the executive director of the New York AIDS Coalition. And actually back then, she was hiring for a community organizer. And I can honestly say it was the worst interview of my life. I left that interview saying, my God, you really sucked at that. It was horrific. But Amy later told me that she saw something in me that was just something she wanted to build and grow. And, I think I'd never lose sight of that, because, I've been thinking about how do I pay that forward throughout my professional career. But Amy was the executive director, was a white Jewish woman. She ran the coalition. And I went into that interview, I don't think I put even complete sentences together, to be honest with you. But it was transformative for me And it really, before then, I was actually in the for-profit world. A number of my friends said, Joe, that these jobs don't really speak to who you are. A good friend of mine knew of an opportunity at the New York AIDS Coalition, and I walked into that interview nervous as hell, to be honest. But Amy, who is probably one of the most important people in my life, really saw something in me. And we developed a partnership over those years when I was a community organizer at NIAC that really I will never forget and always want to pay it forward. So I think that's why I am sitting here, because that moment in time transformed my career trajectory. And this person invested in me, and it was just life-changing.
Beautiful.
And Bryson, I want to just add quickly that it is because of people like Joe Presley and people like Amara Jones that I sit here as well. And I want to make sure I credit them.
Beautiful. So Ashley, you said something that piqued my interest, and I fashioned myself after a few journalists that we know are well known. So I want to sort of dig in there. You said that your mentor helped you have some uncomfortable conversations. Can you say a little bit more about that? What were some of those uncomfortable conversations?
It takes a long time to build self-awareness in yourself, especially in a professional capacity when you are underrepresented professional in those spaces. It also takes a long time to make sure that you're comfortable when you do gain a seat at the table. And so you do need somebody around you who's objective enough to tell you, like, you did that wrong or you did that right. And give you the difficult truth of like, exactly, like, we're talking about a terrible interview here right now. And he still got the job because someone believed in him, but also probably gave him enough structured feedback to make him understand that what he did was wrong. What were the tools and resources that he needed in order to fix that? I think the other thing that's common in all of our stories is that we all have had these reflection points in our careers, and we recognize the hard work that it took for others to get there, and that we also carry the responsibility of doing the hard work to work on ourselves to be able to continue to grow and aspire and open the doors for other people. And so to directly answer your question, it was a lot of hard conversations about what I was doing wrong, where the opportunities were for me, or even just sometimes some places where I didn't have the awareness to even know that like what I was saying was coming off wrong or wasn't sensitive or wasn't landing the way that I intended it to land.
Beautiful. So this is a question to anyone, but I specifically want to hear from Joe first. Did you believe that you needed a workplace mentor when you first were walking into whatever space you were in? Why or why not?
Did I believe I needed a workplace mentor? Absolutely. Absolutely, without any equivocation. I mean, I just told you about the story about my interview. And so when Amy called me back to come in for a second interview, because she was like, what was that mess I just saw, basically. And she called me back in, and we just had a really, really direct conversation. And I told her about my anxiety about leaving the for-profit world and coming into the AIDS community and working in HIV and AIDS. And she said to me that she really, really was invested in my success and wanted me to know that she was going to give me the structure to fly. But that she would be there to catch me, almost like, not quite like Icarus, because I guess I didn't want to get that close to the sun, but allowing me to fly. And then when I fell, because I would fall, she said, to be there to support me and to catch me and to nurture me and to let me know what I could do differently. So absolutely, it was so important that I had someone who I could be vulnerable with, who I could look to for support, and also gave me a degree of autonomy to learn as well. And so, yeah, critical, Bryson, for me.
Beautiful. Lisa, what about you? Oh, go ahead, Ashley.
I I was just going to say, coming into my career, I absolutely understood the need for a mentor, but I didn't necessarily understand the need for multiple mentors. Understanding the different skill sets or strengths that they would help me to grow within myself. Also understanding the backgrounds that they came from. Like I, of course, navigated towards underrepresented mentors that look just like me, but I also had to build relationships with people that didn't look like me so that I could understand the different dynamics that were happening around me. The other thing that I learned along the way was, like, of course I needed a mentor, but I also needed an advocate. And what was the difference between mentorship and what was the difference between advocacy, and really finding somebody that was like basically putting their political capital on the line to make sure that I was moving forward, and what the difference was between the conversations I was having with that person and the conversations that I was having with my various mentors. And so kind of a loaded answer there in that, yes, but different types, and then a different level of mentorship that I found out later on in my career.
Beautiful distinction.
I think for me, I do believe mentorship in the workplace is critically important, particularly for trans people. Up until relatively recently, my only real mentor felt like someone in my family who was my godmother, who loved me unconditionally and showed me what it meant to accept someone. The story of many trans people and queer people in general is one of being disowned and abandoned, which leads to all kinds of horrific things. And so when you do not have that story, when you do have a family structure that actually loves and accepts you for who you are and sees you, it really makes all of the difference. It is the difference between living a successful, sustainable life where you believe in yourself and your potential, and criminalization and homelessness and all kinds of other things that happen to those who don't have that foundation and that support system. I think now that I'm in a new chapter in my life, I do have professional mentors and people who believe in me, but it's a new thing for me to experience, because the world that I come from, the people that I was surrounded by were dealing with so much trauma that they didn't really know how to take people under their wing and mentor them, perhaps because they didn't have that for themselves. And so they didn't know how to replicate that. It really was for me, a one woman who was my godmother, who it was almost divine, like God, who from the moment I was born just chose me as her godchild. I don't know how that works in other families, but there wasn't an option. She was like, you are going to be my godchild. And, that relationship, I think back at it as an adult, and I didn't really appreciate it as a young person. I'm like, but now that I'm an adult, I'm like, wow, like I understand. You showed me what love looks like.
Bryson, Beautiful. Can I add something?
You absolutely can, Ashley.
One of the other things that I also learned really early in my career was the value of peer mentors. So I have trusted confidants that are at the same level in my career with me right now. And I think one of the things that probably is most impactful in those conversations is having like financial conversations with them. A lot of us on this line can probably talk about the fact that we probably were underpaid or underleveled at some point in our careers. And a lot of that, results from being underrepresented people in this space, but being able to have more transparency with my peer mentors to understand if I'm getting the value that I should be getting is something that has been super helpful as I grow in my career. And it also helps me to have these long-term relationships. A lot of, I'm a part of an organization called Add Color, and I joined the organization in 2012 as a future. And a lot of that class of 30 people that I joined that organization with are the people that I'm growing in my career with right now. And I have these long-term relationships with them where they've seen me transform over that time. And so they're able to talk to me in different ways than someone who I just met or someone who is at a different point in their career. And so I did want to make sure that I brought that part of the conversation too, of like not negating the people who are sitting next to you and always looking up for mentorship.
Bryson,
A follow-up.
if I may, I just want to add
Jeff.
one quick thing, if I may. Yeah, I just want to lift up something Ashley said about multiple mentors, and I think that resonates for me as well. I mentioned Amy, but there's also a number of other people who I have leaned into to get different pieces of mentorship. And I would also add that even now, as the CEO of HMI, I still continue to use mentors. And so it's not just about me paying it forward to others, but I think I come from the school of thought. My grandma used to always say, you're never too old to stop learning. And that's what I believe in. And so I think for me, right now, there's Melissa Mark Vivarito, who's the former speaker of the city council. I worked for her at the city council. We remain best of friends. She's part of my family. And to your point, Ashley, she has seen the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? And has helped me to sort of, what she brings to me is like a sense of holding on to being fierce but fair. And I want to continue to do that as I move into the nonprofit world. The other one is David Dinkins, who was just my adopted grandfather. And, he taught me about just being a statesman and being and holding yourself up high and being dignified and congenial, but strong. So there are a myriad of people who make up my mentorship sort of cabinet. And, and I hold on to that. So that's a great point that you made.
Beautiful. I want to follow up, Ashley, to something you said. How does one, in your experience, but how might you impart this to others? How do you begin to have those conversations with people for whom you see as peers that you want to learn from, in a way that, particularly in spaces that may feel competitive, or there may not be the type of environment where people feel like transparency and openness can be? You mentioned pay, and I was thinking, there's all sorts of articles that talk about let's just have the conversation, right? But how do you even approach that in a way that it feels good?
Yeah, it's kind of like dating. You do have to look for trust in other people. You have to look for their intentions, and you really have to make sure that it's a reciprocal relationship. Like, I'm not just going to ask other people what their pay is or like what their secrets to the trade are. I do want to be able to have a conversation that is two-way, but I do think about it in more of like a dating capacity. Like, you do have to find like good humans in life who are willing to give you kind of the keys to the kingdom, and then also I'll pull you to the side and have the conversation with you when you need to course correct on some of the things that you're doing. I won't say that it's easy at all whatsoever. To find good people that are vested in your interests and are comfortable enough with you to invite them into your circle as well, or you into their circle as well, is really hard to find. If not a lot of people, I mentioned the number 30. Of that class of 30, I probably keep in touch with maybe like 6 of them in a consistent manner. There's some of them that I talk to on a daily basis. Some of them work at Facebook with me. And so like our career spaces are very similar in that we can have more tactical conversations. And then there's others who are in different vectors or different parts of the working world that serve as subject matter experts for me in different spaces. A quick story I'll tell before I transition to something else in this conversation, but I'm learning a lot right now about how to leverage other subject matter expertise in other spaces that are not traditional to mine. And I have been utilizing my mentorship in that space right now. Like I mentioned, I have mentors that I talk to, peer mentors that I talk to on a daily basis at Facebook, but I've been spending a lot more time with my mentors outside of that space to help me to figure out how to think more broadly about the work that I'm doing on a day-to-day basis. I got this idea from Crayola launched these new crayons called Colors of the World, and they're crayons that children can utilize in order to draw their skin tones. What I didn't know about that is that they actually borrowed the subject matter expertise from the Fenty Beauty line to be able to create those crayons. And so they created something impactful in the world from a brand that's long standing in color. Like Crayola leads the charge when it comes to color and crayons. Like we don't know anything else other than Crayolas, but they realized that there was a turning point in their trajectory as a business that they needed to bring in a different type of subject matter expertise to help them reach a new height. And so that's really what I've been thinking about in my mentorship circles of like, how do I reassess the subject matter expertise that I have relied on to get me to point B to get me to point C, and really thinking about, again, subject matter expertise in a different light.
That's a beautiful example. Beautiful. I want to sort of have a conversation a little bit for folks who are in the nonprofit, the sort of LGBTQ space around boundaries, because I think that there can be sometimes challenges in that around we work together, we're in community together, or we're in concentric communities together that are both like professional and social. I'm a member of the ballroom community, so there are lots of folks for whom I work with and also am social with, both in New York City and across the country. And so, Joe, or Lisa, answering me this, has there been moments in your professional career where you and your mentor have had a bit of some contention or some areas of like where you had to renegotiate boundaries because, you know, like you said, Joe, that person became like your family? Is there anything that you want to share in that realm that you feel comfortable sharing, I should say, on recorded live?
Recorded live.
Internet? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can share. I'm not going to say we'll share the exact incident, but, you know, there definitely are the person. But, you know, of the mentors I mentioned, you know, a couple of them, we developed really close friendships and it felt like family. But I also, and I think sometimes when you develop those relationships, lines do get blurred or can get blurred. But one of the things I've learned in those instances, and there haven't been many instances when it's happened, is just standing tall in my truth. And I think that the mentorship that I developed with that person gave me the ammunition or the strength, I guess is the better word, to stand true and to have those conversations with that particular person. So for instance, there was an incident where there was something that I wanted to do, and there were other people whispering in that person's ear saying, no, Joe shouldn't do that because of A, B, C, and D. And I went to my mentor, the person who I trusted and valued, and said, no, I think you're making the wrong decision here, and let me tell you why. And so what I've learned from me, and I was going to talk about this later, but mentorship for me is not like this top-down kind of thing, like, let me tell you how smart I am and let me impart my knowledge on you, right? It's bi-directional. And I mentioned earlier, but you never stop learning, right? So I think that the person who I had that difficult conversation with learned more about me and also learned more about process and how to, you know, navigate some of those difficult conversations. So there are a number of other ones I could mention, but there's this one particular incident that happened to me several years ago that stands out in my mind, and it brought us closer. So most definitely.
I haven't had an interaction like that with my mentors. But to your point, Bryson, which is an interesting one that I think we don't really think about with respect to the different arenas in which we find ourselves meeting up, whether that be socially or professionally. I think that I have certainly had interactions where I've had to sort of tell people, you know, I understand that we may be friendly and we may be able to connect in a certain way, but because of our united identities or struggles or what have you, but we have to understand though that there's a professional relationship going on here, and we can't let one trump the other. So I have had that interaction, but not with mentors.
Beautiful. have there been any unintended like benefits? Like, you got a mentor and it's been great, but there are certain things that you were like, I didn't even think that this could be something I would gain from a mentorship that you've gotten from having a mentor. Something that you were like, well, I'll be. That was really helpful. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah.
I mean,
okay. Ahead.
Yeah. The position I'm in now, I mean, the way it came about was one that I have never worked in nonprofit. And there was a bit of what do we call that? Stockholm, what do we call that? The syndrome where you don't, imposter syndrome. I was gonna say a whole other thing. Yeah, there was a bit of that. And it was someone on the board of the New Pride Agenda who called me and was like, you should do this. I think you could do it. I believe in you. And they believed in me and saw my potential more than I saw it in myself. And I questioned them, and I said, I don't know that I could do this. This is sort of a big jump. It doesn't follow the traditional climbing the ladder, if you will. And then I thought to myself, well, you never really have climbed the traditional ladder in anything that you've done. You've always just sort of hopped right into that you're doing. So what would be different about it? But yeah, certainly in the position I have now as executive director, there was somebody on the board who reached out and told me to apply. And I said, sure. And here I am.
Alyssa, that makes me think of Amy, actually, going back to Amy Herman. And I talked about the interview, but I also didn't mention that. In 1999, Amy was actually leaving the organization and New York AIDS Coalition. And she said to me, hey, Joe, I want you to think really long and hard about being the next executive director for the New York AIDS Coalition. And did I see that coming? Absolutely not. Was I surprised? As I look back on it, no, because I think in her head, she had already mapped out in her head a trajectory for me. And she would say, every so often, if I ever leave here, I want you to be the executive director, but it would go in one ear and out the other. And was that a surprise to me? You better believe it. And I think that's what reverberates in my head is this notion of paying it forward, really thinking about other people who I work with, who I could actually pay that forward to and help them, if they so choose, move through a certain path in the organization that I'm pleased to work at now. But I think paying it forward is something that just sort of is in my bones because I think about my own trajectory as well.
I can talk about two instances where I was like, wait, what? This is an opportunity? I talked a little bit about broadening the horizons that one mentor did for me. It is the founder of AdColor, Tiffany R. Warren. When I first met Tiffany, I met her when I was in college, and I used to organize these. I'm from Chicago, and I went to the University of Illinois, and you don't get a lot of like big companies in the cornfields here. And so I used to organize these college tours to New York to help people from underrepresented communities get more exposure to what the possibilities were outside of the Midwest. And so through this process, I met Tiffany. I continued the conversation with her in terms of like my career growth outside of these college tours that I used to lead. And through that process, I started working within the advertising industry. And I worked specifically within creative agencies, which at the time she was working in a creative agency as well. And so like based on her career track, that's what I saw as the opportunity for me to grow. Well, then I joined AdColor, and she exposed me to so many different areas within the advertising marketing world that helped me to better understand what my career potential was, because I wasn't necessarily just like looking at the glass that was in front of me. I was looking well beyond that. And that's what introduced me to tech. I left the advertising industry and joined Microsoft, which was a very transformative part of my career because the problems that you're dealing with are just so much bigger. The impact that you're able to have is just so much more realized outside of working on like 30-second spots within a creative agency. So that was amazing. And I expected nothing more from her. But then several years later, she started involving me in a lot more global work streams. And at the time, when I worked at Microsoft, I was working on very new North America-centric work. That also continued as I moved into my career at Facebook. But through my interactions with Tiffany, I learned a lot more about what my potential and impact could be, and also the learning opportunity for me in global capacities. And so really taking the work that I was doing and again, broadening the horizons of where the impact could lie that I was able to manifest in a global scale outside of North America. I had no idea that that was something that could be a possibility for me because, again, I was looking down and working hard and figuring out, the things that were in front of me. But she really did open up my eyes to things that I had no intention of ever even exploring.
I love the idea of just sort of like building that trust and that relationship and being open so that you can sort of be on this parallel process together and discover things, which is like amazing. I love that. So which brings me to this question, right? Are you currently someone's mentor, right? Have you, as we say at HMI, have you gated it forward? Or how have you, if you have, shown up for someone in the ways that folks have shown up for you?
I have and am. I've talked about in this conversation, I believe a lot in transparency and being able to talk to the mentees that I have in my life about the mistakes that I've had and help them to understand the learnings that I was able to attain from that. I also am a big proponent of financial transparency. So I'm actually working with, which is why I keep glaring at my phone. I'm working with one of my mentees right now on a job offer and really helping her to like be aggressive in that negotiation process and being transparent with her about where I was able to grow in that capacity. I 100% believe in karma and paying things forward. And so I will definitely be a mentee or a mentor to people for the rest of my career, as long as people will listen to what I'm saying, because I have no doubt that I was able to get to where I am in my career because of people and not necessarily because of the function of job growth.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I would say, Bryson, that there definitely are a couple of people who I maybe didn't look at as mentees per se, but have absolutely shared with them knowledge and my lived experiences that I have acquired with the hopes that it would help them in what they were trying to do with themselves. Particularly as it pertains to my former endeavor politically, there are young trans people who come to me and express desire to also get involved in the political world. And so that's one particular avenue where I've been able to say, well, here was my experience, and here was perhaps the mistakes I made, or here are the good things that I did that you should emulate or consider doing yourself. So absolutely. But also what I keep thinking about when you ask this question, my socioeconomic status has changed. And for me, it has opened the door to be able to give back financially to so many grassroots organizations that are doing very important work that otherwise wouldn't be able to have access to resources because mainstream establishment foundations or philanthropists don't agree with, that sort of way of going about advocacy. And so that is where I feel it is important for me to give back and support, trans leadership and trans advocates and just queer people in general who are forming their own mutual aid organizations and are doing so much incredible work and filling the void and the gaps of what both government and establishment organizations have failed to do.
I think for me, to in terms of, am I someone's mentor at this current point in my life? Since I started here at HMI, it's been 9 months now, and what has been a constant sort of voice in my head is like, oh, I need to join Big Brother or Big Sister, and find a mentor that way. But what I will say is that being here at HMI, what is really clear to me, and it actually came up through my interview process, and I don't know if this is appropriate to mention on this call, but I'm going to, that, our organization is about 70 strong, 70 folks on staff. And a number of those folks, and to be frank with you, as you go down in terms of hiring, a lot of those are the line staff are people of color, right? In terms of our clients that we serve, over 90% of our client base are young people that we serve are people of color. Most of those are Black and brown. And so what is clear to me is that within this organization, there has to be a thread of mentorship throughout the organization, not only amongst staff, but also with our young people as well. And so one of the things I'm trying to build, haven't built it yet, but I'm doing it in concert with people like Bryson and other people in the organization, is really creating a thread of accountability, of real stewardship, really of being visible to our young people. And that's my role as CEO. So like, for instance, since I've been here, I've met a number of times, and of course, this is challenging in virtual world, in Zoom world, but have made it a point of making certain that the young people we serve know me and I know them, and being accessible and accountable, answering their questions, talking about where I'm looking at as I move forward as the CEO of this organization. So mentorship for me, I think, is taken on a different sort of model, if I can say that, that I'm not saying I'm a mentor to everyone in the organization, but really modeling and being a role model and standing true in my own self, being my authentic self, I think has been helpful. And I think is actually helping me get my feet further planted on the ground here at HMI. So do I want to be someone's direct mentor? You believe I do. And I'm thinking about, as I look at, the leadership in the organization, of other staff, of things that I can do to share my own history about how I got to where I am. Trying to build in, I'm thinking also about building in coaching into the organization, because I think that's extremely important for staff. But no one directly at this moment, to be completely honest. But I look at the whole organization as a way that we can create a model of mentorship for everyone in this organization, including me. But I think it's really important that we sustain that throughout the entire organization, and that we get people to think differently about mentorship as well. So I'm excited about that, and I'm looking to really build it as we move forward.
Yeah. I'm actually really excited about how this panel came together, because I think another underlying thing that we just haven't talked about is the levels of mentorship. And so if you do think about your offering of mentorship to the world in tiers, there are tier one or VIP people who you do spend a little bit more time with, you're more nurturing with them. And then there are, another group of people that it's more so scaled support, where you are providing them with perhaps inspiration or thought leadership on topics that aren't necessarily always discussed. I come from a political family, and so I was raised in community organizing. And so I think it's second nature to me to always think about community impact and more so scaled resourcing. And when I think about that in my mentorship practice, that is for me level 2, but I guess I've never tangibly talked about it or thought about it that way. And that, I probably do have some leveling to this that I've just naturally applied because of my upbringing. But I'm really excited about the learning that I have from this panel of differentiating between my VIP or tier 1 mentees and then my scaled impact that I have across lots of communities.
Beautiful. So what advice would you give to someone who's looking to or interested in being a sort of workplace mentor? What are some of the things that you would impart on them as someone who has been mentored and mentors?
I mean, I can start.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, Ashley, go ahead.
I was just going to say that mentorship and then also being a mentee, it's like work on both sides. And so you do have to really step into that role and really identify, these are the things that I am committing to this. These are the things that I'm committing for the long haul. As a mentor, you do have to actively listen, being able to really understand what your mentee is trying to communicate back to you so that you can understand the problem that they're trying to solve is something that's really important in helping them solve that problem. I'm a big person about transparency, like not being guarded in those conversations. And then also some selflessness, like there's not always going to be a impact for you in your mentorship relationship. Majority of the time, it probably is not an impact for you, but it is your paying forward that you're doing. As a mentee, I always preach to my mentees. I used to manage a mentorship program here in Chicago that connected underrepresented people that were 1 to 3 years worth of experience in their career paths to people that were a little bit more seasoned. And one of the things that I would harp a lot to our junior mentees was the responsibility that they have to guide the relationship. As a mentor, I need you to tell me, what do you want me to help you with? What problem do you want me to solve? I need you to help continue to facilitate those conversations and move them forward. Schedule the coffee chats. Make sure that we're talking on a weekly or a monthly basis or, quarterly or whatever. As a mentee to the people that I am a mentee to, I just have very aggressive reminders in my calendar. It's not always taking time from them, but maybe it is just dropping them an email to say, hey, saw this article, thought about you. Here's some of the things that I was thinking about it. What do you think? Like, it doesn't necessarily always have to be something that's like so time consuming, I guess. But again, like just taking that intentionality and responsibility as a mentee to lead the relationship to get what you want out of it.
Beautiful.
I guess what I would add to answer your question, Bryson, is, I think that while I acknowledge the importance of identity politics, look, I'm a Black gay man, came up, my organizing was through that identity. And I understand the importance of community politics and identity politics and finding someone who has your shared experience. What was important for me, and I keep going back to Amy, is thinking about, outside of the box, that yes, those things I just mentioned were very important. But I'm a complex man, with many different issues, right? And what Amy did for me, this white Jewish woman, is that she helped me put those things together. And I would just say, be creative. Think about, that. Look at that person and think about, what am I missing that they have that I would like to get? How do they help complete me? How do they help me to grow? I am someone, and maybe folks on this call disagree with this, but I don't think it's about you better believe I have Black gay men in my life who I cherish, right? But when it comes to mentorship, I think outside of that box, right? Because my world is about creating allies and about building a bigger world, a better world, right? And to do that, I have so many people in my life who sort of complete that. Earlier in this conversation, I could have mentioned this Suki Ports, an Asian woman who is 86 years young. She has taught me the power of coalition work, right? I talked about David Dinkins. This Patrick McGovern, a white Irish gay man who was instrumental in helping me think about, again, I talked about being the fierceness, but also dignity and being fair and fierce. There are a myriad of people. So I would just say, as you think about mentorship, be creative and think about what it is that you're looking for in yourself that needs to be rounded out. I think therapy for me has been really helpful. Personal therapy, to sort of look at those things, and really things that will I need to sort of build on. And yeah, some of those things I get from friends, but some of them have really been built out by mentor-mentee relationships. And then lastly, and I said this earlier, as a mentor, you never stop learning, right? It can't be, Moses coming down from the mountaintop carrying the 10 commandments and let me impart my knowledge upon you. It really has to be, yes, I do have experience. Yes, I do have insight to things that I've done, but you better believe I learned from mentees as well. I learned from my staff here at HMI, and I never stop learning. And I think that if you have that approach, it makes you human and it makes the relationship with the mentee so much more powerful.
Bryce, I don't really have advice or best practices on how to be a good mentor. From my community, I think visibility and seeing role models in public spaces is relatively new phenomenon. And it's just yesterday that we were on TV on the big screen where everyone all of a sudden cared about us and wanted to understand us and who we were and what it meant to identify as transgender and non-conforming. I do have a message for young people who want to be mentored and who would like to be mentees. And my message to them is something I find myself saying all the time, is that a closed mouth does not get fed, and that you have to ask questions, you have to step in the room, no matter how anxious or scared you may be, no matter how you may feel that you don't belong there, you do belong there. Speak up, find your voice, and if you're scared, don't show it, hide it. But understand that there are people out there who do want to help you, but sometimes need you to ask for that help. And so what I hope that young queer people and young trans people are able to see now is themselves reflected in what it looks like to be productive and to be in positions of influence. And my message to young people is to really find your voice and to be unafraid, unabashedly unafraid, and to understand that you do have power. And it may take some time for you to figure that out and learn what that power is, but it's in there. And only that power is going to be able to help you get to where you want to be in life. And so my message is more to the young people who want to be mentored, and less to the people who are doing the mentoring.
Makes sense. We have a couple of questions. This one specifically for Ashley. The question is, how does Facebook encourage mentoring for all its employees? So specifically, how does Facebook
do it? How do we do the thing? We have a lot of avenues for it. You talked about some of the scalable approaches we have, like employee resource groups, ERG groups. We also have business resource groups. We talked about coaching here. Coaching is available to us through the Better Up program, which helps you to build some what I've used coaching for is to understand what I'm trying to solve for, to then be better informed in my mentorship capacity. We also have something that recently launched called Family Circles. They're circles of 6 to 7 professionals that's led by a leader in the organization. And so it's kind of this approach to group mentoring, so that there is, one person that is being, that is leading a group of like 5 to 6 professionals. I specifically love those because there is someone who is more senior in their career, more accomplished, but there's also a lot of peers at the table for you to be able to learn from. And then I'm trying to think, what else do we do? Each of our business groups, I think I might have mentioned this, has BRG community, so that then it creates a different space for you to be able to meet with people who are similar to you, have the same walks of life than you, and are in your specific business. And I think I am probably missing a lot because we do a lot around mentoring, but those are probably the biggies that are off the top of my head.
Beautiful. I see Joe taking some notes, so we might be taking some of those ideas back to HMI. So shout out to Facebook for the ideas. We're coming down the last 2 minutes before we do our closeout. So any final words you'd like to impart to our viewers, both who are present with us now and view this in the future, around the power of mentorship and why it's important in our work?
I guess I'll start. As I stated before, mentorship and loving a young queer person is the difference between a sustainable life and an abandoned life that's full of tragedy and hardship. And so I want to center that. And what I also want to center to people that have the ability to do so is a very short, sweet, and concise and clear message, which is to hire transgender people in your organizations, promote transgender people in your organizations, give them an opportunity, see the potential in them, because we have so much work to do when it comes to providing sustainable and gainful and meaningful and fulfilling employment for the trans community who is still suffering from unemployment and inequality and income inequality specifically. And it is a reason why we resort to certain unconventional means and measures to survive. And so there are people in this world who have the power to change that, and they should do so.
Beautiful.
Absolutely.
I will keep it short since we are short on time, but growing in your career is hard. It is not linear. And so you do need to just have the cheat codes and do what you can to get mentors that can give you the cheat codes to make it a lot easier.
And as we're approaching the 30-second mark, just stand in your truth. And I completely agree with Ms. Crespo that just investing in staff and really listening to your staff and thinking about ways that there could be bi-directional ways that you can learn from each other. So I think this has been great. And I think we need to have more of these conversations throughout the community to help us all think differently about mentorship.
Well, Ashley, Joe, and Elisa, thank you so much for being here and sharing your knowledge. And thank you to our audience. It's been a pleasure to host, and thank you again. Take care.
Thank you.